When I opened my laptop that Tuesday morning and saw my childhood home listed for sale without my knowledge, I thought it was a mistake. The $3 million mansion that belonged to me legally and morally was being marketed as available immediately. My parents had somehow managed to forge documents and were planning to sell my property to fund my golden child brother's extravagant wedding. What they did not know was that their greed had just triggered a federal investigation that would destroy everything they thought they knew about family loyalty. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, you will want to see how this mansion scandal completely unraveled my entire family. Let us get into this incredible story of betrayal, fraud, and the sweetest justice I have ever witnessed. My name is Aurora Blackwell, and until 6 months ago, I believed my family was everything to me. I am 28 years old, a successful tech entrepreneur who built my company from the ground up after graduating from Stanford. The mansion in question sits on 5 acres in an exclusive neighborhood outside Seattle, a property I purchased 3 years ago with my own money after selling my first startup for 8 figures. The house was not just an investment, it was my sanctuary. I had spent countless hours renovating every room, designing the perfect home office where I could work on my second company, and creating spaces where I hoped to build my own family someday. My parents, Margaret and Robert Blackwell, had been so proud when I bought it. They bragged to everyone about their successful daughter who owned such a beautiful property before turning 30. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with a notification from a real estate app I had installed months earlier out of curiosity. Sometimes I like to see what properties were selling in my area, but when I opened the notification, my blood turned ice cold. There was my house, my gorgeous colonial mansion with its wraparound porch and perfectly manicured gardens. The listing showed professional photos of every room I had carefully decorated, every piece of furniture I had chosen. The description read, "Stunning 5-bedroom estate available for immediate purchase. Motivated sellers ready to close quickly." My hands shook as I scrolled through the details. The listing agent was someone named Patricia Morrison from Emerald Coast Realty. The asking price was $2.8 million, slightly below market value for a quick sale. But what made my stomach drop was seeing my parents listed as the property owners. I immediately called the listing agency, my voice barely controlled, as I explained the situation to Patricia Morrison herself. She seemed confused at first, then concerned as I provided proof of my ownership. I had purchased the property entirely with my own funds, and every document clearly showed Aurora Blackwell as the sole owner. Patricia asked me to hold while she reviewed the paperwork my parents had provided. When she returned to the line, her voice was grim. "Miss Blackwell, I think you need to see these documents your parents brought to me. They have what appears to be a deed transfer showing that you gifted the property to them last month. They also have power of attorney papers that supposedly give them authority to sell on your behalf." My heart pounded as the implications hit me. "Ms. Morrison, I never signed any deed transfer. I never gave my parents power of attorney. I have never even discussed selling this house with them." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Patricia spoke again. "Miss Blackwell, if what you are telling me is true, then we may be looking at document fraud. I am going to need to see your original ownership papers immediately, and I think you should consider contacting law enforcement." I drove to the real estate office, in a daze, my mind racing with questions I could not answer. Why would my parents do this? How had they even obtained documents that looked legitimate enough to fool a real estate agent? And most importantly, where did they think they could hide after stealing millions of dollars from their own daughter? Patricia Morrison turned out to be a sharp woman in her 50s who had been selling real estate for over 20 years. She spread the documents across her conference table like evidence at a crime scene. The forged deed transfer was particularly sophisticated, complete with notary stamps and what appeared to be my signature. But I could tell immediately that the signature was not mine, and more importantly, I had never been to the notary office listed on the document. "Your parents seemed very eager to close quickly," Patricia explained as we examined each page. "They mentioned something about needing the funds for a family emergency. They were hoping to have everything finalized within 2 weeks." A family emergency. That phrase triggered something in my memory. 3 weeks earlier, my brother Derek had called to tell me about his engagement to his longtime girlfriend, Melissa. He had been gushing about their wedding plans, mentioning how they wanted something elaborate and expensive. My parents had been equally excited, talking about how they wanted to give Derek the wedding of his dreams. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This was not about a family emergency. This was about my parents deciding that Derek deserved my hard-earned money more than I did. They were planning to steal my house and use the proceeds to fund their son's fairy tale wedding, probably believing they could convince me afterward that it had all been for the good of the family. Patricia and I spent the next hour documenting everything. She made copies of both the forged documents my parents had provided and the legitimate ownership papers I had brought. She also gave me contact information for Detective Sarah Williams, who specialized in real estate fraud cases. As I left the real estate office, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice sickeningly sweet as she asked about my week. I listened to her chatting about trivial things, all while knowing that she and my father were actively trying to steal my home. When she casually mentioned that Derek and Melissa had found the perfect venue but needed help with the deposit, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. "That sounds lovely, Mom," I managed to say. "I am sure you and Dad will figure out how to help them." After hanging up, I sat in my car and let the full weight of the betrayal wash over me. These were the people who had raised me, who had taught me about honesty and integrity. These were the parents who had celebrated every success in my life and supported me through every challenge. Now they were willing to commit federal crimes to steal from me, all for the sake of my brother's wedding. But as the initial shock began to fade, it was replaced by something much more dangerous: determination. My parents had made a catastrophic mistake. They had assumed that I would be too hurt or too loyal to fight back. They had underestimated exactly how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine and to make sure they faced consequences for their actions. I started my car and drove straight to the police station. It was time to turn this family drama into a criminal investigation. Detective Sarah Williams had the kind of steady, analytical demeanor that immediately put me at ease. Her office was organized and professional, with commendations covering one wall and case files neatly stacked on her desk. When I explained the situation, she listened without interruption, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions that showed she understood exactly how serious this was. "Document fraud of this magnitude is a federal crime," Detective Williams explained as she reviewed the papers Patricia Morrison had provided. "The sophisticated nature of these forgeries suggests this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. Someone put significant time and planning into this scheme." She pointed to specific details on the forged deed transfer that I had not noticed. "See how they replicated the exact formatting of legitimate county documents. The fonts, the spacing, even the watermarks look authentic." This level of forgery typically requires either professional equipment or connections to someone who knows how these documents are created. My stomach sank as the implications became clear. "You are saying my parents did not just decide to steal from me last week. They have been planning this for months." Detective Williams nodded grimly. "The timeline suggests they started working on this shortly after your brother got engaged. They would have needed time to study authentic documents, practice forging your signature, and find someone willing to notarize fraudulent papers. This was a calculated conspiracy." She explained the next steps in the investigation. The FBI would need to be involved because the case crossed state lines and involved sophisticated document fraud. They would analyze the forged papers for evidence, trace the origins of the fraudulent notary stamps, and potentially set up surveillance to catch my parents in the act of attempting to complete the sale. "I need to ask you something difficult," Detective Williams said, her voice gentle but serious. "Are you prepared for the possibility that this investigation could result in serious criminal charges against your parents? We are talking about federal felonies that carry significant prison sentences." I had been dreading this question, but my answer came without hesitation. "Detective, 3 days ago, I would have said my parents were the most honest people I knew. Today I discovered they are willing to steal millions of dollars from their own daughter. If they are capable of this, then they need to face the consequences of their choices." The detective outlined 2 possible approaches. We could confront my parents immediately and potentially get them to confess, but that risked them destroying evidence or fleeing. Alternatively, we could allow them to continue with their plan while under surveillance gathering ironclad evidence of their criminal intent. I chose the surveillance option. If my parents were really planning to steal my home, I wanted to make sure they could not claim it was all a misunderstanding or that they had planned to tell me eventually. I wanted them caught red-handed with no possible way to deny what they had done. Over the next week, Detective Williams and her team worked with federal agents to set up the investigation. They installed surveillance equipment near the house and began monitoring my parents' communications. Patricia Morrison agreed to cooperate fully, pretending to move forward with the listing while actually documenting every interaction with my parents. The hardest part was acting normal around my family. My parents called me several times that week, their voices cheerful and loving as they asked about my work and my life. Each conversation felt like torture, knowing that they were actively working to betray me while pretending to care about my well-being. Derek called me too excitedly, sharing wedding planning updates and thanking me for being such a supportive sister. He had no idea that our parents were planning to finance his dream wedding by stealing my property. I wondered if he would have gone along with it if he had known, and that uncertainty made me feel sick. On Thursday, Detective Williams called with an update that made everything worse. "We have been monitoring your parents' phone calls, and we discovered something troubling. This is not their first attempt at document fraud. They tried something similar 2 years ago with your grandmother's estate, but your uncle threatened legal action and they backed down." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. 2 years ago, when my grandmother passed away, there had been some family drama about her will. My parents had insisted that certain valuable items should have been distributed differently, and there had been heated arguments at family gatherings. My uncle had accused them of trying to manipulate the probate process, but I had dismissed it as grief-induced family tensions. "Your uncle never pursued charges because he got the items back and wanted to avoid destroying the family," Detective Williams continued. "But now we know this is a pattern of behavior. Your parents have done this before." This changed everything. What I had initially seen as a desperate attempt to help my brother was actually part of a larger pattern of financial crimes. My parents were not stressed, loving people who had made one terrible mistake. They were repeat offenders who had learned that family members would not press charges to avoid embarrassment. That night, I lay awake thinking about every family financial conversation we had ever had. I remembered my parents asking detailed questions about my business finances, my property taxes, my investment accounts. I had thought they were just proud parents interested in my success. Now I realized they had been gathering intelligence for future crimes. By Friday, the federal investigation had expanded beyond just the house fraud. Agents were looking into my parents' financial records, searching for evidence of other fraudulent activities. They had also contacted my uncle about the previous incident with my grandmother's estate. Detective Williams scheduled a meeting for the following Monday to discuss the next phase of the operation. Patricia Morrison had reported that my parents were becoming impatient about the timeline, asking repeatedly when they could expect to close the sale. They had also started pressuring her to accept a slightly lower offer from a cash buyer who could close within days. "They are getting desperate," Detective Williams observed. "Desperate criminals make mistakes, and mistakes give us evidence." As I prepared for another weekend of pretending everything was normal, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. The initial shock and heartbreak were being replaced by something colder and more determined. My parents had made their choice when they decided to steal from me. They had made their choice when they decided that Derek deserved my money more than I did. They had made their choice when they decided to treat me like a victim instead of their daughter. Now it was time for me to make my choice, and I was choosing justice no matter what it cost my family. The following Monday brought developments that transformed our investigation from a simple fraud case into something much more complex and disturbing. Detective Williams called me early in the morning, her voice tense with urgency that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Aurora, we need to meet immediately. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit discovered something significant when they started digging into your parents' background." Her tone suggested this was not going to be good news. I met her at the federal building downtown, where I was introduced to Special Agent Michael Torres, a veteran investigator who specialized in sophisticated financial fraud schemes. The conference room where we gathered felt sterile and intimidating, with walls of case files and federal law enforcement certificates, creating an atmosphere that made the seriousness of the situation undeniable. Agent Torres spread a collection of documents across the table with methodical precision. "Miss Blackwell, what we initially thought was an isolated incident appears to be part of a much larger pattern of criminal activity involving your parents." He pointed to bank statements, property records, and legal documents that painted a disturbing picture. "Over the past 5 years, your parents have been systematically targeting elderly relatives and family friends for various forms of financial fraud. The attempted theft of your property is actually the largest single crime we have uncovered, but it is far from their first." My hands trembled as I reviewed the evidence. There were forged documents related to my late grandfather's pension benefits, fraudulent insurance claims filed after my great-aunt's death, and sophisticated identity theft targeting several family friends who had trusted my parents with personal information. "They have stolen approximately $400,000 over 5 years," Agent Torres continued grimly. "They have been using the money to maintain an expensive lifestyle while appearing to be model citizens in their community." Detective Williams added context that made my stomach turn. "Your brother's wedding is not the real motivation here. Your parents are facing significant debts from their fraudulent lifestyle. They owe money to multiple creditors and were apparently planning to use the proceeds from selling your house to disappear entirely." The room felt like it was spinning as the implications sank in. This was not about favoritism toward Derek or wanting to give him a perfect wedding. My parents were career criminals who had been stealing from vulnerable family members for years, and I was simply their largest target. Agent Torres pulled out another set of documents that made everything worse. "We also discovered that they have been systematically gathering personal information about you for over 18 months. They have copies of your financial statements, business contracts, and property records. They have been planning this specific crime against you for much longer than we initially believed." I stared at copies of my private documents, wondering when and how my parents had obtained them. Some appeared to be photographed during visits to my home, while others suggested they had somehow accessed my mail or online accounts. "There is more," Detective Williams said softly. "We found evidence that they were planning to frame you for financial improprieties with your own company. They had prepared documents suggesting you were embezzling funds, apparently planning to use that as justification for taking control of your assets to protect the family from scandal." The betrayal was so complete and so calculated that I struggled to process it. These were not the loving but misguided parents I had believed them to be. These were predators who had been systematically planning to destroy my life and steal everything I had worked for. Agent Torres leaned forward, his expression serious. "Miss Blackwell, we need your help to catch them in the act and to gather evidence about their other crimes. But I want you to understand that once we move forward with this investigation, there will be no going back. Your parents will face federal charges that could result in decades in prison." I thought about Derek, who, as far as I knew, was innocent of his parents' crimes. I thought about the extended family members who would be devastated to learn the truth about people they trusted and loved. I thought about the elderly relatives my parents had victimized, people who had probably died never knowing they had been robbed by family members. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. The plan they outlined was both simple and terrifying. I would continue acting normal while wearing a recording device during all interactions with my parents. The goal was to get them to admit their criminal plans and ideally to reveal information about their other victims. Patricia Morrison would also continue cooperating, scheduling a fake closing meeting where my parents would be arrested in the act of attempting to complete the fraudulent sale. Federal agents would simultaneously execute search warrants on their home and vehicles, gathering evidence of their broader criminal activities. "The key is maintaining the element of surprise," Agent Torres explained. "Your parents clearly believe they have manipulated you successfully for years. They have no reason to suspect you know about their crimes." Over the next 3 days, I had 2 recorded conversations with my parents that revealed the depth of their deception and arrogance. During a dinner at their house, they casually discussed their financial struggles while simultaneously lying about their plans for Derek's wedding funding. They even had the audacity to suggest I should be more generous with family members who were less fortunate than me. My father made comments about how successful people had obligations to take care of their families, while my mother noted that my house was too big for just one person anyway. They spoke as if my potential loss of the property was a reasonable sacrifice for the greater good of the family. But the most chilling moment came when my mother mentioned that they had been researching options for helping me manage my finances more responsibly. She suggested that young entrepreneurs sometimes needed guidance from experienced adults to avoid making costly mistakes with their money. The recordings made it clear that stealing my house was just the beginning of their plan to take control of my assets. They intended to systematically strip away my financial independence while positioning themselves as concerned parents protecting their irresponsible daughter. During that same dinner, Derek called to share more wedding planning updates, his voice full of excitement about the perfect venue his parents had helped him secure. Listening to his innocent enthusiasm while knowing the truth about how they planned to pay for everything was one of the most difficult moments of my life. When Derek asked if I wanted to see the venue this weekend, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to avoid breaking down completely. Standing in my childhood bathroom, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence of a massive lie, I made a final decision about how far I was willing to take this investigation. I returned to the dining room and told my parents I would love to see Derek's venue. I suggested we make it a family day, maybe have lunch together afterward. They agreed, enthusiastically pleased that I seemed to be embracing their vision of family togetherness. What they did not know was that I had just arranged for them to be arrested in front of my brother on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of his engagement. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how completely my understanding of my family had changed. 3 weeks ago, I had believed I was part of a loving, supportive family where people looked out for each other. Now I knew I had been raised by criminals who saw me as their most valuable mark. The woman who had sung me lullabies and helped with my homework was the same woman who had spent months planning to steal my home. The man who had taught me to drive and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation was the same man who had forged legal documents to rob me of everything I had earned. But tomorrow, their long con would finally come to an end, and I would get to see their faces when they realized their victim had become their downfall. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that should have made everything feel fresh and hopeful. Instead, I woke up with my stomach in knots, knowing that this would be the day my family imploded forever. The FBI surveillance team had been in position since dawn, and Detective Williams had confirmed that everything was ready for what Agent Torres grimly called the takedown. I met my parents and Derek at the wedding venue at 10 in the morning, forcing myself to smile and act excited as we toured the elegant ballroom where Derek and Melissa planned to exchange vows. The venue coordinator, a cheerful woman named Linda, showed us through every detail, while my parents nodded approvingly and made comments about how perfect everything would be. "The deposit is due next week," Derek mentioned casually as we admired the garden ceremony space. "But Mom and Dad said they have it handled. I still cannot believe how generous you two are being about this." My father clapped Derek on the shoulder with fake paternal pride. "Son family takes care of family. Your mother and I have been planning for this day since you were born." The irony was sickening. They had indeed been planning, just not the way Derek imagined. I watched my parents interact with my brother, seeing clearly now how they manipulated his emotions and his trust. Every loving gesture felt calculated, every proud smile seemed designed to maintain their cover as devoted parents. After the venue tour, we went to lunch at Derek's favorite restaurant. The atmosphere was festive, with my parents ordering champagne to celebrate the upcoming wedding. They toasted to family loyalty and Derek's happiness, all while knowing they were hours away from completing the biggest theft of their criminal careers. "Aurora, you have been quiet today," my mother observed with fake concern. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" I managed a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Just thinking about how much our family means to me, Mom. How important it is that we always tell each other the truth." Something flickered across her face, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, honey. Honesty is the foundation of any strong family." My father raised his glass again. "To honesty and loyalty, the Blackwell family values that will never change." I nearly choked on my water. The audacity was breathtaking, even after everything I had learned about them. They were toasting honesty while actively committing federal crimes. They were celebrating loyalty while systematically betraying everyone who trusted them. At 2:30, Patricia Morrison called my father's phone to discuss final details for Monday's closing meeting. I watched him step away from our table to take the call, his voice smooth and confident, as he confirmed his availability to sign the paperwork that would transfer my property to new owners. When he returned, Derek asked about the call with innocent curiosity. "Just some business details," my father said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about, son. Your mother and I have everything under control." Derek beamed with gratitude, completely unaware that his parents were about to destroy his relationship with his sister forever. I wondered how he would feel when he learned that his dream wedding was going to be paid for with stolen money, that every detail we had admired that morning was financed through fraud and betrayal. At 4 o'clock, we returned to my parents' house for coffee and wedding planning discussions. Derek had brought photo albums and vendor information, eager to share every detail of his plans with the family. My parents played their roles perfectly, asking questions and offering suggestions while I sat there knowing this would be our last normal family gathering. Agent Torres had texted me that afternoon to confirm the timing for Monday's operation. Patricia Morrison would call my parents at 9 in the morning to request an earlier meeting time, claiming the buyers wanted to close immediately. When my parents arrived at the real estate office at 10:30, federal agents would be waiting. But as Derek showed us pictures of wedding cakes and flower arrangements, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Detective Williams. "Emergency. Parents trying to move up timeline. Need to execute arrest tonight." My blood turned to ice. Somehow my parents had sensed something was wrong and were trying to accelerate their escape plan. Agent Torres called me 5 minutes later with details that made my hands shake. "Your parents contacted Patricia Morrison an hour ago demanding to close the sale tomorrow instead of Monday. They claim to have a family emergency requiring immediate access to the funds. We believe they suspect the investigation and are trying to complete the theft before we can stop them." The next hour passed in a blur of coded text messages and careful acting. I had to continue participating in wedding discussions while federal agents positioned themselves around my parents' neighborhood. Derek showed us venue contracts and menu options while outside law enforcement officers prepared to arrest our parents for multiple felonies. At 6:45, Patricia Morrison called my father back with the news that the buyers had agreed to an emergency closing meeting at 8 o'clock that evening. She would meet them at the office with all necessary paperwork. My father accepted immediately, his voice betraying excitement that he could barely contain. "Margaret, we need to leave in 30 minutes," he told my mother with barely suppressed urgency. "The buyers want to close tonight instead of waiting until Monday." Derek looked confused by the sudden change in plans. "Close what? Are you selling something, Dad?" My mother quickly deflected. "Just some investment property your father has been working on. Nothing important, sweetheart. Why do not you and Aurora finish looking at those catering menus while we handle this boring business meeting?" As my parents rushed upstairs to gather their fraudulent documents, Derek turned to me with concern. "Aurora, do Mom and Dad seem weird to you today? They have been acting strange all afternoon." I looked at my brother, this sweet man who was about to have his world destroyed, and felt my heart break for him. "Derek, there are some things about our parents that you do not know, things that are going to be very hard to understand." Before he could ask what I meant, we heard my parents coming back downstairs. My father was carrying a briefcase that I knew contained forged deeds, fake power of attorney documents, and fraudulent identification papers. My mother clutched her purse like it contained precious treasure. "We should be back in 2 hours," my father announced cheerfully. "Derek, congratulations again on finding such a perfect venue. Your mother and I are so proud of the man you have become." They hugged both of us goodbye, their embraces feeling like final performances in a play that was about to end forever. My mother held me an extra moment, whispering that she loved me and was proud of my success. As their car pulled out of the driveway, I knew I was watching my parents leave for the last time as free people. In exactly 90 minutes, they would walk into that real estate office, expecting to steal millions of dollars from their daughter. Instead, they would be arrested by federal agents and charged with crimes that would send them to prison for decades. Derek and I stood in the doorway, waving goodbye to people who would never come home again. The call came at exactly 9:53 that evening. Detective Williams' voice was professional, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath her controlled tone. "Aurora, your parents are in federal custody. The arrest went exactly as planned." I was still sitting with Derek in our parents' living room, surrounded by wedding magazines and cake photos that now felt like evidence from a crime scene. My brother had been chattering nervously for the past hour, sensing something was wrong but unable to identify what. When my phone rang, he looked at me with growing alarm. "Who is calling this late?" Derek asked as I stepped into the kitchen for privacy. Detective Williams provided the details quickly. My parents had arrived at the real estate office with complete confidence, carrying briefcases full of forged documents and fake identification. They had walked into Patricia Morrison's conference room expecting to complete the sale of my house, and instead found themselves face to face with Agent Torres and 4 other federal investigators. "Your father immediately tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding," Detective Williams reported. "He insisted that you had given them verbal permission to sell the property and that the paperwork was just a formality. Your mother started crying and saying they were just trying to help Derek with his wedding expenses. But the recorded conversations I had provided made their claims impossible to maintain. When Agent Torres played back their discussions about manipulating my finances and taking control of my assets, both my parents had finally understood how completely they had been caught. The search of their house turned up evidence of at least 12 other fraud victims over the past 5 years," Detective Williams continued. "We found Social Security numbers, bank account information, and forged documents targeting elderly relatives and family friends. This was a sophisticated criminal operation." As I listened to these details, Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. "Aurora, what is happening? Who are you talking to? Where are Mom and Dad?" I hung up the phone and looked at my brother, this innocent man whose life was about to be shattered by learning the truth about our parents. There was no gentle way to tell him that the people who had raised us were career criminals, that the wedding he was planning was going to be paid for with stolen money. "Derek, you need to sit down. There are things about Mom and Dad that you do not know." Over the next 2 hours, I walked him through everything I had discovered. I showed him copies of the forged documents, recordings of our parents discussing their criminal plans, and evidence of their other victims. Derek listened in stunned silence, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and grief as he processed the magnitude of their betrayal. "They were going to steal your house to pay for my wedding," he said finally, his voice hollow with shock. "Everything I thought I knew about them was a lie." The hardest part was watching Derek realize that our parents had been manipulating him too. They had encouraged his expensive wedding plans specifically because they needed justification for their theft. They had used his happiness and excitement as cover for their criminal activities. "Did they ever love us?" Derek asked, staring at family photos scattered across the coffee table. "Or were we just marks to them like everyone else they stole from?" I did not have an answer for that question. Maybe our parents had genuinely loved us while simultaneously planning to exploit us. Maybe they had compartmentalized their criminal activities so completely that they could be affectionate parents and ruthless thieves at the same time. Or maybe everything had been manipulation designed to maintain access to potential victims. At midnight, Agent Torres called to provide updates from the interrogation. My parents had eventually confessed to multiple crimes, apparently hoping that cooperation might reduce their sentences. They had revealed the locations of hidden assets, provided names of additional victims, and admitted to years of systematic fraud targeting vulnerable family members. "Your parents were facing overwhelming debt from their fraudulent lifestyle," Agent Torres explained. They had been living well beyond their means for years, using stolen money to maintain appearances while accumulating credit card debt and unpaid loans. The sale of your house was supposed to fund their escape to a non-extradition country. This revelation made everything worse. Our parents had not just been planning to steal from me. They had been planning to disappear entirely, leaving Derek and me to discover their crimes and deal with the aftermath alone. They would have abandoned us completely after destroying our lives. Derek broke down completely when he learned about their escape plan. "They were going to take the money and run," he sobbed. "They were going to let me get married with stolen money and then disappear forever." By 3 a.m, we had called Melissa to explain why the wedding would need to be postponed indefinitely. Derek could not bear the thought of celebrating while our parents sat in jail for federal crimes. Melissa was understanding but devastated, especially when she learned that the perfect venue they had chosen was booked for months in advance. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze of legal consultations, media attention, and difficult conversations with extended family members. News of the arrests spread quickly through our community, with local reporters calling constantly for comments about the sophisticated fraud scheme perpetrated by the model suburban couple. My uncle called Sunday morning with a mixture of vindication and sadness. "I knew something was wrong 2 years ago when they tried to manipulate your grandmother's estate," he said. "I should have pressed charges then instead of trying to protect the family." Derek and I spent Sunday afternoon going through our parents' house looking for evidence of their crimes and trying to understand how we had missed so many warning signs. We found fake bank statements, forged documents, and detailed files on potential victims. Our childhood home had been the headquarters for a criminal operation that had lasted for years. But the most disturbing discovery was a folder labeled Aurora Financial Analysis. that contained detailed information about my business, my assets, and my spending habits. Our parents had been studying me like a target for over 18 months, planning exactly how to steal everything I owned while maintaining their cover as loving parents. They knew everything about your life, Derek said numbly as we reviewed the files. They had been planning this for so long. By Sunday evening, the full scope of their crimes was becoming clear. The FBI had identified 14 separate victims, mostly elderly relatives and family friends, who had trusted my parents with personal information. The total amount stolen approached $600,000, making this one of the largest family fraud cases in our state's history. As Derek and I sat in our empty childhood home that night, surrounded by evidence of our parents' betrayal, we both understood that our family would never recover from this. The people who had raised us, who had taught us right from wrong, who had claimed to love us unconditionally, had been planning to destroy our lives for money. Tomorrow they would be arraigned on federal charges that would likely send them to prison for 20 years. And Derek and I would begin the long process of rebuilding our lives without the family we thought we knew. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse lobby watching my parents being led away in handcuffs after receiving their sentences. My father got 22 years for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. My mother received 18 years for her role in the scheme. At their ages, these were essentially life sentences. They had both pled guilty in exchange for reduced charges, but even their cooperation could not mitigate the severity of their crimes. Judge Harrison had been particularly harsh during sentencing, noting that they had specifically targeted vulnerable family members who trusted them completely. "You weaponized the love of your own children and elderly relatives," Judge Harrison had said before announcing their sentences. "You turned family bonds into criminal opportunities. Your actions represent a fundamental betrayal of the most basic human relationships." Derek stood beside me as we watched them disappear through the courthouse doors for the final time. My brother had aged years in the past 6 months, but he had also grown stronger and more independent than I had ever seen him. The man who had once been our parents' favorite child was now their most articulate critic. "Do you think they understand what they lost?" Derek asked as we walked outside into the spring sunshine. I considered his question carefully. During the entire legal process, our parents had focused on minimizing their prison sentences rather than acknowledging the emotional damage they had caused. They had never apologized for betraying us, never expressed genuine remorse for their crimes, never asked for forgiveness from their victims. "I think they understand that they are going to prison," I replied, "but I do not think they understand that they destroyed their family for money they could never keep." The past 6 months had been the most difficult period of my life, but they had also been transformative in unexpected ways. Derek and I had grown closer than ever before, bonded by shared trauma and the need to rebuild our understanding of family loyalty. We had learned to trust each other completely while maintaining healthy skepticism about everyone else. Melissa had postponed their wedding initially, but 3 months later, she and Derek had decided on a small, intimate ceremony focused on their love rather than expensive displays. I had walked Derek down the aisle since our father was in federal prison, and the moment had been more meaningful than any elaborate celebration could have been. The extended family had rallied around Derek and me once the initial shock wore off. My uncle, who had suspected our parents years earlier, became a source of wisdom and support. Cousins, grandparents, and family friends who had also been victimized by our parents' schemes formed a network of survivors helping each other heal. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned to distinguish between biological family and chosen family. The people who truly loved me had supported my decision to pursue justice, even when it was painful. The people who criticized me for destroying the family by pressing charges revealed themselves as enablers who valued appearances over accountability. My business had actually grown stronger during the crisis. Clients and partners who learned about my situation were impressed by my integrity and determination to do the right thing, regardless of personal cost. Several major investors specifically mentioned my handling of the family fraud case as evidence of my character and leadership abilities. Patricia Morrison, the real estate agent who had helped expose the crime, became an unexpected friend and mentor. She had dealt with numerous fraud cases during her career, but she said our situation taught her important lessons about the complexity of family betrayal. Most fraud victims are embarrassed and want to handle things quietly, Patricia told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. Your willingness to pursue full prosecution probably prevented your parents from targeting other families. You saved people you will never even meet. The house that my parents had tried to steal remained my sanctuary, but I had made significant changes to reclaim the space emotionally. I renovated the home office where I had first discovered their betrayal, turning it into a brighter, more open space that reflected growth rather than trauma. I also started hosting regular gatherings for Derek, Melissa, and our chosen family members. Detective Williams and Agent Torres had both mentioned that our case became a training example for other investigators dealing with family fraud schemes. The sophisticated nature of my parents' criminal operation and the long-term planning involved made it a textbook example of how family trust could be weaponized for financial gain. Your parents were not desperate people who made one terrible mistake, Agent Torres had explained during our final meeting. They were career criminals who happened to be your parents. Understanding that distinction was crucial for your healing process. The restitution process was complex, but ultimately successful. My parents had hidden assets in multiple accounts, and federal investigators were able to recover most of the money they had stolen from various victims. I donated my portion to organizations that help elderly fraud victims, feeling that the money was too tainted to keep. Derek used his recovery money to start a nonprofit organization focused on financial literacy for young adults. He said that if our parents had taught us anything valuable, it was the importance of understanding money management and legal protections. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that my parents had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my adult life, the knowledge that I could survive anything. They had taken their best shot at destroying me, using every advantage of love, trust, and family loyalty, and I had not only survived but emerged stronger. The family that raised me was built on lies, manipulation, and exploitation. But the family I chose after their betrayal was built on honesty, mutual support, and genuine love. Derek and Melissa, my uncle and his family, Patricia Morrison, and even Detective Williams had become my real family through shared values rather than shared DNA. 6 months ago, I had believed that family loyalty meant protecting relatives regardless of their actions. Now I understood that real loyalty meant holding people accountable when they betrayed fundamental principles of honesty and respect. My parents had spent years planning to steal my house, but in the end they had given me something much more valuable, the certainty that I would never again confuse love with manipulation or family with exploitation. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and justice in your own life? How do you think you would have handled discovering that your parents were career criminals targeting you? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because stories like this remind us that family is about more than blood relations. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories that prove truth really can be stranger than fiction. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that choosing justice over family loyalty is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for watching, and remember that your worth is never determined by how family members treat you. It is determined by how you respond when your values are tested. Until next time, trust your instincts and protect what matters most.